Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on something pretty unnerving. It's about how fear, just plain fear, gets used to justify laws and restrictions. And we're not talking about some conspiracy theory here.
Yeah, not at all.
For individual freedoms, out the window.
That's the danger, isn't it? Fear can erode those freedoms so fast.
And this wasn't just a one-time thing, right? We see it again in 20th century America, the Red Scare.
Absolutely. Our sources call out Senator Joseph McCarthy as a master of exploiting those Cold War anxieties. He really knew how to create that frenzy of suspicion.
Accusing people of communist ties left and right.
And with little to no evidence to back it up. A true witch hunt.
It's hard to believe how many lives were ruined based on just whispers and rumors, careers destroyed, reputation shattered, all because of this perceived threat.
And it highlights something really crucial for everyone to think about. The power of framing.
Framing.
McCarthy, he was good at it. He framed any opposition, any disagreement, as proof of communist sympathies. A masterful tactic, no doubt, but deeply, deeply disturbing.
So basically, he used fear to silence dissent.
Wow. Exactly. Now, speaking of chilling examples, we can't forget Nazi Germany.
Oh, man.
The Reichstag fire in 1933.
Right, the fire at the German Parliament building.
To this day, the origin of that fire is debated.
Really? I didn't know that.
But the key thing is that Hitler used the fear and chaos from that event to justify the Enabling Act. Gave him dictatorial powers, basically.
So he seized on the opportunity.
The Reichstag fire was a gift to the Nazi regime, a perfect excuse to get rid of opponents and dismantle Germany's democracy. They exploited fear brilliantly.
And that paved the way for the horrors of the Holocaust, right?
Tragically, yes. It shows what happens when fear goes unchecked and when those in power exploit it for their own gain.
Chilling. But, these might seem like events of the past, something from history books, but the echoes, they're still felt today.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's move to the Waco siege in 1993.
Ah, Waco, an event that still sparks debate and controversy even now.
For 51 days, federal agents and the Branch Davidians, led by David Koresh, were in a standoff, all at their compound in Waco, Texas.
It all started with a raid, right, over supposed weapons violations.
Yeah, but it quickly turned into this huge siege the whole nation was watching.
It's important to remember how the government portrayed the Branch Davidians. That played a huge role in public perception and how they justified their actions.
So how were they portrayed?
As a dangerous cult, stockpiling illegal weapons, brainwashing their members, that kind of thing.
Setting the stage, so to speak.
And that narrative, amplified by the media, created this climate of fear. And that allowed for a very militarized response. Tanks, tear gas, even psychological warfare tactics.
It's heavy stuff.
It really is. And makes you wonder, was that extreme response really necessary? Or did fear of this so-called cult lead to excessive force?
It's a question worth asking, especially when you consider what happened in the end.
The fire.
That devastating fire that killed 76 people, many women and children among them.
A tragic end to a very tense situation.
It left a mark on the nation, and it raised serious questions about the government overstepping its bounds, all in the name of security.
And Waco might have set the stage for how the government reacted to future crises, especially after the 9/11 attacks. Waco. It's a chilling example, isn't it? How they shaped the narrative around the Branch Davidians. Really a glimpse into how fear is exploited to justify those aggressive actions.
And you're saying these same tactics were used after 9/11?
Maybe even more effectively. After 9/11, everyone felt it. That sense of fear, vulnerability.
Yeah, the nation was shaken. And the government, they had to do something, right?
Exactly. There was immense pressure to act, and to act decisively. And that's where the USA Patriot Act comes in. Our sources highlight how this law, it passed so quickly with huge support. It gave the government a lot of new powers, especially when it comes to surveillance.
It was a big debate back then.
Yeah.
Warrantless wiretapping, the NSA's programs expanding.
Right. Privacy advocates were really worried. They warned about potential abuse, about how this could chip away at our civil liberties.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About what we're willing to give up when we're afraid.
It's one of the most powerful tactics, really. Presenting these extreme measures as temporary, as something we need to do just for now.
Like the Patriot Act. They said it was vital but time-limited, a tool to fight terrorism. But we've seen it happen before.
Temporary often becomes permanent. A lot of the Patriot Act provisions, even though they were framed as emergency measures, they were extended or even made permanent.
It's like that saying, right? Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program.
Pretty accurate. And this leads us to another tactic, scapegoating, polarization. After 9/11, there was this effort to create a clear us versus them. Anyone who questioned the Patriot Act, anyone who worried about civil liberties, they were labeled unpatriotic, maybe even sympathetic to terrorists.
It made it dangerous to even disagree.
It created an atmosphere where dissent was basically disloyalty, and it worked. It's easier to restrict freedoms when you've turned a group of people into the enemy.
Divide and conquer.
Fear works best in those environments, where complex issues are simplified, reduced to black and white. It's harder to have a real discussion, to consider other viewpoints when you're constantly told about this huge threat from some faceless enemy.
It's like they shut down the conversation before it can even start.
Exactly. And sadly, this pattern, this using fear for political gain, it's not just in the past. We see it in the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a very recent, and for many, a very raw example.
Yeah, it's still fresh in our minds.
The pandemic was tough, no doubt, unprecedented challenges. But it also showed how far governments were willing to go to restrict freedoms, all in the name of public health. Lockdowns, travel bans, mask mandates, and then, of course, the vaccine mandates.
It was a really intense time.
It was. And while public health measures were necessary, there was a lot of debate. How far should these restrictions go? How long should they last?
The debate got heated quickly.
It did. It became very polarized, each side accusing the other of being reckless or authoritarian.
It felt like people dug in their heels. No room for compromise.
It's interesting and honestly a bit unsettling how quickly the pandemic response became a political litmus test. Almost like the virus itself didn't matter as much as the fight over freedom versus responsibility.
So it was about ideology more than the actual virus.
In some ways, yes. It's like the pandemic made those divisions in society even worse. It made it harder to have those difficult conversations about finding the right balance between safety and liberty.
It feels like we're always walking that tightrope.
We are. And one thing that stands out to me is how many people accepted restrictions that just a few months earlier they would have fought against. It really shows you the power of fear, how it can change our minds about what's acceptable, even when it comes to our basic freedoms.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from the French Revolution to the War on Terror to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a bit heavy, isn't it? Kind of depressing even.
It is, but it doesn't have to be a hopeless situation. Our sources, they also offer some ideas about how we can resist this, how we can protect our freedoms, even in the face of fear.
It's a lot to take in, right? All these examples, how easily fear can be used against us.
It can feel overwhelming. But the good news is our sources don't just point out the problem, they offer solutions too. Ways we can fight back against this manipulation and hold on to our freedoms.
So what can we do? Where do we even start?
Awareness is key. Just knowing these tactics, understanding how they work, that's a big step. Once you see how those in power, or even just people with a platform, use fear to sway opinion, you're less likely to fall for it.
So it's like having this mental radar to spot those red flags.
Exactly. Like if a news story or something you see on social media, it's making you really angry or scared. Stop for a second. Ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? What's the agenda behind this?
That makes sense. Take a step back, basically.
Right. Cultivate that healthy skepticism, especially with information that's pushing your emotional buttons. And don't just passively consume things. Be active. Seek out different perspectives.
So not just staying in our own little bubbles, where everyone agrees with us all the time.
Exactly. Make an effort to engage with viewpoints that challenge you. It's easy to dismiss the other side, but remember, those exploiting fear, they want us divided. They want us fighting each other so we don't see the bigger picture.
It's a classic distraction technique, isn't it?
It is. And speaking of distractions, be careful about media, both traditional and social media. It can be used to shape the narrative, to amplify fear. Don't just believe the headlines. Look deeper. Find the evidence. Think about who's saying it.
Yeah, so we need to be more media savvy. Learn how to really analyze the information that's thrown at us every day.
You got it. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you know about these tactics, the less likely you are to be manipulated by them.
Forewarned is forearmed, as they say. But it's not just about knowing, right? We have to actually do something.
You're absolutely right. We need to stand up for strong institutions, demand transparency from those in power, and hold them accountable. Support organizations that are fighting for civil liberties. Talk to people who see things differently than you do. And never underestimate the power of your own voice.
So it's about staying informed, getting involved, and speaking out. Not just watching from the sidelines, but actually participating. shaping the world we want to live in.
That's it. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in protecting our freedoms, making sure fear isn't used to divide and control us.
Well said. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that we're not helpless. We're not powerless against fear. We have the knowledge, the tools, and most importantly, the choice in how we react.
Throughout history, it's been everyday people who faced down fear, challenged the norm, and fought for a better world. You have that same power within you.
That's a powerful thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And remember, keep questioning, keep challenging those assumptions, and most importantly, never stop digging deeper.